Monitoring this level helps you beat the odds for 8 of the top 10 killers. I'm going to show you how to measure this and which way I recommend the most. Instead of carrying oxygen, glucose sat in oxygen's seat and caused 8 out of the top 10 most deadly conditions. Why did glucose do that? Because you let your average blood sugar hang out too high. The longer you rob oxygen from the cells in your heart, the more diseased your heart becomes. This applies to all of your cells of vital organs like your brain, kidneys, and immune system. Hopefully you get my point. Lower blood sugars with an average in the 80s is best. It's the average blood glucose that matters the most. So let's figure out, what's your average blood glucose? Prick your finger right now and check your blood sugar. Using a glucometer called point of care testing, my blood sugar is about 85, but that's not my average. To get my average, I will need to prick my finger multiple times an hour. I need more data to get the average. Some sugars after I eat will be higher for a while, and sugars after I haven't eaten in hours, like in the morning, should be lower. All of those blood checks are valuable, but it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. It gets old checking that often, and it's very disruptive to life and sleep, because you gotta check at night too. When I ask patients to check their blood sugars multiple times a day, it doesn't take long before they don't check after they've eaten something they shouldn't. They ignore the mistake by not looking, but your hemoglobin still took the hit. If we want an average, we need all the numbers. So as we review, what are the pros and cons about point of care? Well, for starters, the access is amazing. You do not need a prescription from me to have one of these. Also, the cost is perfect. It is very economical to buy the meters and the strips and check your glucoses. And the feedback to the patient is immediate. That's point of care. The number of times they have to test per day should be closer to 200 in a day, and most patients just won't do that. And even when they check that many times a day, the correlation to your average blood glucose is still pretty poor because they're not checking when they're asleep, and they just can't check as often as we need them to. So point of care meters have some limitations. Continuous glucose monitors helped with this problem. This is a second option for figuring out what's your average blood glucose. These fancy advancements in medicine use a microfilament inserted into the fat just under your skin. That microfilament detects the glucose in that tissue, that fatty tissue just below the skin, and it approximates the sugars found in your serum. It then sends the information through a microfilament to a sensor taped to your body, and that is communicating with a smart device. So cool. Some systems require that patients wave their smartphone over the sensor to check their blood sugar, and they didn't have to prick their finger. The more advanced monitors check the blood glucoses every 5 minutes without bothering the patient. It looks at those glucose numbers when they're awake, when they're asleep, after they've eaten something they shouldn't. It allows the patient and the doctor to look retrospectively on what the blood sugars have been doing. Now, they don't get out of pricking their finger completely. Calibration of their continuous glucose monitors means they will still have to prick their fingers and check the continuous glucose monitor to match their home glucose meters. The need for a prescription actually isn't the greatest barrier, it's the cost. It costs about $10 to $15 per day to wear one of these. Now, not gonna lie, the feedback is amazing. It is transformative to watch a patient understand what these foods are doing in real-time data. It is the average blood sugar that matters the most, and it links them to this broken metabolism when they use that continuous glucose monitor. There are plenty of people who said the aha moment for them came when they were wearing one of these devices. They still do need to prick their finger 1 to 2 times a day to keep that machine calibrated and working right, and the link to average blood sugar is pretty great. The biggest downside is clearly the cost. My favorite way to do this is still to use the blood test glycated hemoglobin A1C to find their average glucose. The story usually goes like this. When I meet a patient and I suspect that there's a problem with their metabolism, I ask the patient to do this test. It actually works much better than trying to get them to do dozens of finger pricks or the cost of a CGM. For this test, they often have to pay out of pocket, which is about $80 to $100. Insurance only covers this test if they're already a diabetic, and I want to stop the process before they become a diabetic. Once they're diagnosed, the insurance company will let me order this $80 test every 3 months like clockwork, and for good reason, because there's no cheating with hemoglobin A1C. Unlike the point-of-care tests with glucometers, patients have to be good for 90 days for the test to look healthier, improved when they come in to see me. As opposed to what they do when I just use this, which is they improve their food choices for about a half a dozen days before they come see me. And by golly, their blood sugars are improved when they eat better. For a hemoglobin A1C, we collect a few red blood cells and we measure the percentage of the seats that are ruined. How many of them are no longer carrying oxygen? So if a patient comes into the office and their average blood sugar for the last 3 months has been close to 200, but I check their sugar in the office and it's only 126. I can look at their hemoglobin A1C and it's going to be about 8.6. Yeah, 8.6% of the seats are now glycated or splat with sugar and out of commission. Their blood sugar of 126 was way out of range for their typical pattern because they stopped all those carbs the week before they saw me. If 126 had been their average, their hemoglobin A1C would have been about 6. That's actually still pre-diabetic according to the textbooks. This test is fantastic for insurance companies. They knew exactly who was behaving and who was not. And more importantly, they knew exactly who was at risk for 8 of the top 10 most deadly illnesses in medicine today. But the test should not just be for my diabetics and their big brother insurance companies. I want my other patients to know their average glucose before they ever become a diabetic. I want them to know how many of their hemoglobins have become glycated, causing a slow suffocation of those vital cells in their body. Their excess blood sugar caused the harm, and the average blood sugar is what told the truth. So take a look at this list. Find what your average blood sugar is and what your hemoglobin A1C should be. 85 is what I want my average blood sugar to be, which would be a hemoglobin A1C of 4.5, or 4.5% of my seats have been glycated. Patients move into the pre-diabetic range when their average blood sugars were at 111, or an A1C of 5.5. An A1C of 6.5 was an average blood sugar of 140. And we get into the diabetic range and the severe complications when those average blood sugars range to the 160s, the 170s, the 180s, and then north of 200. All of them associated with a more rapid suffocation of the vital cells because they're not getting the oxygen they require. 6.4 indicates prediabetes, but 6.5 is now a diabetic. As you can see, this is a gradual increase, and there are these arbitrary places where we say pre-diabetic and diabetic. But the ideal average blood sugar is 83, and that means that most of the time the sugars are between 75 and 95. There'll be some that dip down into the 50s, and they may bounce up into the 120s for a few minutes a month, but the average is spent in that zone between 75 and 95. Today, there is a better option for the patients that want to know their hemoglobin A1C, but they don't want their insurance company to know it. And that is point-of-care home tests for A1C. Yes, you can use that sneaky strategy just like your insurance company, and you don't need to tell them. For $40, you can check your own average blood sugar by checking your red blood cells through a hemoglobin A1C. Order that sponge card and drip your red blood cells onto the card, send that testing card into the lab, and find out what have your average sugars been for the last 100 days. Instead of checking this test every 3 months like your insurance allows, I tell my patients, Check it every month until you get your average as close to 4.5 as you possibly can. So the final comparison is, how does hemoglobin A1C compare to these other options for average blood sugars? When I order the test, it requires my order into the lab. There are some exceptions. Some labs allow you to order it yourself and pay for it yourself. That does require you going to the lab and an actual blood draw. The home test is a prick of the finger and dripping those red blood cells onto the sponge card and mailing it in. Both of these options are very economical. The cost really is not prohibitive, even when the patients pay cash. The results aren't immediate. They do need to wait a few days to get the report back, and they can't exactly link it to which foods cause the highest increase in their blood sugars. Your insurance and most labs will allow patients to have this test once every 3 months, whereas the home test you can check every month. And that's what I recommend for my patients. For predicting average blood sugars, hemoglobin A1C is the best. It doesn't take a break when you sleep, it doesn't turn off when you don't calibrate it, and it doesn't close its eyes when you eat something you shouldn't. It truly is measuring how many of those glucose came in contact with your hemoglobins inside the red blood cells for the last 100 days. Join me. Check your average blood sugar with a prick of your finger and a sponge card that you send through the mail. Click the link below. Let's start improving your health. Monitoring this level helps for 8 of the top 10 killers. I'm going to show you how to measure this and which way I recommend the most.